All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Hermit Radio. I'm your host, Cameron. Today, I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Dr. John Schinnerer. And John, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you, Cam?
I'm doing good. I'm excited for our conversation. I was happy to get you booked. I know you're a busy guy, but I was pretty pumped to get you back on. And honestly, I'd love to have you keep coming back on because I feel like we have good conversations.
Oh,
We have the right
absolutely.
mind
Yeah,
for
yeah,
it.
yeah. Well,
John,
thank you.
for anybody that hasn't that may not have listened to the first episode we did, would you introduce yourself, talk about what you do?
Sure. I coach men. I coach men towards success and happiness. I'm a big fan of positive psychology, having gotten into it about 2005. PhD from UC Berkeley in psychology. Uh, Consulted on Inside Out. Have an online. Pardon me. I think I got the COVID. um, have an online anger management class that over 15,000 people have been through, a fact which I'm quite proud of. And more recently, I went from anger management to working with male executives and businessmen, which led to more recent work in relationship skills because I realized the biggest point of their pain was at home with their spouse.
Mm.
And that led to masculinity. And that led to work I'm doing presently in the man box culture about how we're socialized as men and how it kind of screws up our shot at happiness and screws us up in relationship.
Yeah, I love that. And that's kind of what we talked about last time you were on the show. We talked a lot about that man box culture. Today's conversation is going to be a little different. I mean, I guess different, but not so much. I want to because I want to build on the last two conversations I've been having that you and I briefly talked about before we started. So the first thing I want to talk about is narcissism. As I told you before, I find that there are quite a few people, maybe people who have heard that word but don't know what it means, or have never heard of the term gaslighting. And I'll be honest, in my own life and in my own research, I have found that there are a lot of people who have narcissistic tendencies and don't even realize it. Like, I think that for a lot of people, maybe even myself before, is that thought that narcissism was pretty uncommon, but I'm starting to think that it is actually very common. Would you like to elaborate on that or kind of like break that down?
Sure. I mean, so first of all, I have a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, quite educated, who doesn't believe that narcissism and borderline personality disorder exist. He
Wow.
looks at it more specifically in terms of traits,
Okay.
breaking it up into certain traits. And I think I get his point because someone can have 4 out of 5, 4 out of 6 of the narcissistic traits, maybe some borderline traits. There's, to your point of how prevalent is it, it's about 14% of the population that's either narcissistic or borderline or both. And there's a 40% overlap between those with narcissistic tendencies also have borderline tendencies. Narcissists in general, and I differentiate between people with narcissistic tendencies and people with narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder is like a 10 on a 10-point scale of narcissism. People with narcissistic tendencies, much more common, much more prevalent, and a lesser degree of intensity on these traits. The traits of a narcissist include things like charm, very charming, very glib, will compliment the hell out of you, great smile. You like to be around them initially until you get to know them more closely. They're pretty big on deceit and manipulation. But it's funny, I talked with Jodie Foster recently, who's a psychiatrist at University of Chicago, and she said, no, deceit's not a trait in narcissists. She would put that more on the psychopathy scale, that of psychopaths. And she said, a
Interesting.
narcissist might have a little psychopath in them or
Yeah.
sociopath. So there's some, just to be clear, there's some debate over what it is and what falls into the category. For me, it's deceit, manipulation, charm. There's narcissistic rage. So when they tend to have a very soft or fragile ego. So when they are challenged, they often will fly into anger, if not outright rage, and attack you back verbally on an unrelated topic. So for
Yeah.
instance, if you approach a narcissist and you're in a relationship with one and you say, hey, I'm disappointed that you couldn't show up on time, they can fly into a rage and start attacking you because you were late once 7 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, okay, I understand that I was late 7 years ago, but that's not the issue right now. We're talking about you being late for the meeting today. And so you got to be aware of that narcissistic dynamic of the rage and the subsequent attack, because if you can be aware of it in the moment, you can step out of that quick defensiveness and keep it focused, keep the conversation focused on that one dynamic of, okay, I understand you think I'm an asshole from last year, but let's stick to the topic at hand, which is the fact that you were late for this meeting.
Right. And then would you say that kind, when I'm hearing that makes me think of gaslighting, right? Is that
Yeah.
am I getting that?
And gaslighting has a few different definitions, but when I hear gaslighting, when I think about gaslighting, I think it's basically one of the other hallmark traits of a narcissist is kind of denial of reality. And it sounds something like you hear the narcissist say something yesterday. Today, you go back to them and you said, well, you said that we could do this today. And they say, no, I never said that. Or that never happened. And so that's the gaslighting part, is they get you to question your own perception of reality, your own memory. And that can be crazy making for the person around the narcissist. And so, to me, one of the solutions to that is, once you realize that's the dynamic, start taking notes. And I remember when I was dealing with one, I would just take notes on my phone and write down, okay, this was the situation, this was the date, this is what they said. So that then when I would come back and they're like, no, that never happened, or I didn't say that, I could go, well, I took notes right after the conversation and here's what you said. And, one of the things that narcissists don't like is they don't like to be pinned down. They don't like transparent communication, because the more that people communicate around them, the more their lies can be exposed.
Exactly.
And that kind of puts their game kind of at a screeching halt.
Yeah. That's exactly, I'm glad you said all of that. I think that really just puts the nail on the head. And like I said, I really am finding that there are a lot more people that have these tendencies than we might think. Even if it's not, like you talked about scales, right? Like levels. I think everybody has the ability to do it in some level. There's so many people that I've had in my personal life who do things just like that, who say something and then you'll be like, well, wait a minute, didn't you say this? And they're like, no, I didn't say that. Right. And that kind of ties in to the next part of the conversation, but I want to kind of keep going with this before we move into the next part. But so, okay, for people who are listening to this, if they're in a relationship or they're in a work environment with somebody that's a narcissist, what are some things that they can do? What are some tools at their disposal to work with it?
It depends where you are in the hierarchy. And by that, I mean, like if you're a child and you've got a parent that's narcissistic, like one of the things I will tell to young people who has a narcissistic mom or narcissistic dad is, make sure you believe your own senses, believe your own memory. And you have to have this conversation in your head, like, this person's trying to gaslight me, or this person is, kind of disrupting reality. I need to make sure that I remember what I see, I remember what I hear. And because that part really is, or can be, crazy making. So, it depends where you are in the power structure. For instance, if you're in business and your supervisor is narcissistic or has those tendencies, then my approach is compliment the hell out of them. That one of the things you want to, because they want to take credit for all the ideas.
Right.
And if you're in that situation, maybe it's good to allow them to take credit for the ideas. The other thing you can do is you want to throw seeds of ideas into their head. So if you want something badly in the workplace and you have to go through your supervisor to get it, plant the idea in his or her head and then back off. Like, just put the idea out there and then let it go for a few days or a few weeks. Usually what happens is the narcissist will come back and say, I have a great idea. How about we do this, which was exactly what you suggested 3 days ago. So
Mm,
if you can get your ego out of it and allow them to take credit for it, you can kind of work it that way. Typically, people with narcissistic tendencies manage well up the chain of command, and they kind of dump on everyone below them. So they're absolutely happy, raging and yelling at people that are their peers or below them in the hierarchy. I had one client who saw that during a business meeting of professionals, the boss, who had some narcissistic tendencies, yelled at one of the employees in front of 10 other people for 45 minutes.
wow.
And like, that's brutal. So the other thing with narcissists is you want to have really clear boundaries. And the boundaries can be physical, they can be verbal, they can be temporal. Like, I've only got 15 minutes to talk on this phone call, and then I got to go to a meeting. They can be like verbal, like, hey, sorry, you can't talk to me like that. If you want to talk to me, you're going to have to talk to me kindly or respectfully. And again, that also kind of hinges on where are you in the power structure or the hierarchy.
Right.
Because if they're your peer, you can talk to them differently than, if you're a director and they're the executive VP. And
Definitely.
same thing if you're a child versus a parent. But I think the other possible relationship there is being in a romantic relationship with one, because they're easy to fall for romantically. And then you get into a relationship after they've, showered you with compliments and told you that you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then all of a sudden they show up with low empathy, with rage, with deceit. And then you're like, this person wasn't the person they presented themselves when we first started dating.
Yeah. I think that that's probably a huge one, right?
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me, if I could put a face to the description you're talking about, Christian Bale in American Psychopath or American Psycho.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
and see, I think that would be a combination of some narcissism, some psychopathy.
Psychopath. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Sociopathy.
you think you were just, talking about like the charm, right? Like the charm that is just kind of the surface layer, because what's underneath is that rage, that anger, and that manipulation, right? And I've been in my own, armchair psychology research. What I find is that, like, not a lot, but some of this stuff stems from childhood behavior, but like learning how to lie, right? Like when we're children, we learn to lie, and once we learn how to lie, not everybody lets it go, right? I mean, like, I don't know many people that I'm one of the few people that I know that personally makes it a goal to not lie to people. I don't think most people do that, because I mean, why would you, unless you have some kind of like religious hierarchy belief that keeps you in line, or have some kind of virtue to not lie. There's no incentive, because really lying is a great tool to keep yourself out of trouble or to get ahead. And I think that is just a slippery slope, and that only grows, right? As a children, it's just to keep you out of trouble, but then as you get older, it becomes a more well-defined tool.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, how well does the lying work for you at a young age?
Right.
What are the consequences for lying? Because sometimes lying works. Like, you go to your dad and you say, hey, Dad, can I get my allowance? And he gives it to you. And you go to your mom and you say, hey, Mom, can I get my allowance? Dad didn't give it to me. And you get it twice. And they're like, oh, this works pretty well.
Yeah.
And so I think it also comes down to values. I think one of the values that people with those sorts of tendencies have is the end justifies the means.
Yes.
So if I get what I want, then it doesn't really matter how I got there. And I would argue that that's not the best way to live life.
Right. And I think this is a good bridge to get into the next conversation, because again, the last two conversations I've had, I've been playing with this idea, really trying to formulate an idea of this, virtues, right? The Stoics, the Greeks talked about it. It's talked about in religion. And I've been kind of on the premise of thinking like, okay, virtues are great. Virtues are like, even in the military, right? Like in the army, you have the 7 core values: loyalty, duty, respect, self-assertiveness, honor, integrity, personal courage, right? You have those things and they're instilled in you, but there's also a reason to have them, to do them, because if you don't do those things, you get punished, right? In a religious structure, the goal of living virtuously is to appease God or to not be punished by God, right? What I've been thinking about lately is that what is the incentive for people to do that if there is no reason or balance to do it, right? Like if you're not in the military and you're not living that way, right? If you're not in a military lifestyle and you could be punished for not doing that, or if you're not in a religious setting, what's the incentive for people to live virtuously? The last not the last guest I had, but Dr. Joe Meyer, we talked about it's just to aspire to do that, right? But not everybody feels that way. I mean, there's lots of people who could give two shits about that. Their highest virtue is wearing sweatpants and sitting on the couch all day. So is it possible to have a society that lives based on virtues like honor and honesty, and duty, without there being some actual reason for doing it?
Wow, that's a big question. And it's funny also because I think, traditionally we have thought of values and virtues as the realm of religion.
Yes.
That's kind of where it originated, for many of us. And yet the bulk of Americans are now saying that they are no longer identifying as a certain religion. Many of them are saying spiritual, but not religious.
Yes.
Many of them are saying not religious at all, or atheistic, agnostic. And so that is kind of an interesting shift to what's happening. I would say that, to me, the primary reason for living a virtuous and values-driven life is happiness. That it's the best way I know of to be, I want to say guilt-free. I don't know. It's to feel less guilt, to feel less anxiety, that it gives you confidence in yourself and who you are, to know that you're living within the guardrails of your own values. And I think you're right. I think that there is a significant percentage of people that live a value-free life. Again, it might be 10 to 15%. And the other thing to keep in mind is, even, if we're going into like this Democrats versus Republicans political split that we're in right now, I think one of the things to keep in mind, or even like America versus terrorists,
right,
all those groups have values.
Yeah.
They're just different values from ours. So even the terrorists, Al-Qaeda, I mean, they have values. And, I think that one of the ways out of this is to have an open, curious, non-judgmental attitude towards finding out what are the values that are driving this group of people.
Yeah. And I think that what we would find is that not all of them would be the same, but I guarantee you that we would find commonalities between us, regardless of, religion,
family,
or
country, courage,
exactly. Yeah.
Religion. Yeah.
And then that plays into, I guess I could go into a lot of different ways, but what I wanted to bring up next was this idea, that I've heard several people talk about it, and I've been talking about it on the podcast, is this idea that, it could be a global thing, but I think specifically I want to focus on the United States, is that we might be seeing a mass psychosis. And the premise of that is what I have been reading from a book from my last guest, Robert Talese, his book, Overdoing Democracy. Now, his book is not about mass psychosis. His book is about polarization beliefs, right? Polarizing beliefs in our setting that right now are particularly political, right? And so he makes a claim in the book. You could talk, he talks about how you can pretty much identify somebody's politics based off of whether they like Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, whether they like, because in that can get into all kinds of things. But I think that when people think about it, it seems pretty obvious, right? Like Home Depot versus Lowe's, or I don't know, there's a million things. Like he makes a lot of good points in the book, but what he says is that is the problem, is that we have overdone democracy, right? There is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And what we have done is it's like sports teams, right? Politics has become almost like virtue signaling of almost like sports teams, right? Some people are on the Patriots fans and some people are New York Giants fans, but that has become so extreme that we are now in a place, and I hate bringing this up so many times, but it's just a good example. I was talking with somebody at my work and they said, yeah, I don't really like talking to people anymore because I don't want to find out that they're Republican. And I've been having a lot of conversations with people who feel that same way, right? I just talked to somebody recently who said, like, all Republicans are bad. They're all terrible people. They're all, blah, 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 right? And it goes both ways, right? I guarantee you there's just as many people who hate Democrats as that there are who hate Republicans. But my problem with all of that is that, what are you going to do? You're just going to get rid of everybody that identifies as a Republican or Democrat? That doesn't make sense. That's not how democracy works. We need both party systems to work, but we have let shit get so out of control that this is where I personally believe that we are experiencing a mass psychosis. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And maybe you could even give us like if you have a good definition of mass psychosis, maybe you could like plug that in.
Well, I was going to ask you for a definition of mass psychosis.
So again, armchair psychology research. Examples of mass psychosis. One example is in the past, there was a small town in Europe that everybody in the town developed hysterical laughing for apparently no reason. Everybody just started laughing and it wouldn't stop. Nobody could explain it. Everybody in town, they were all just hysterically laughing. And then just as quickly as it came on, it left and it didn't come back. Now, that's a very quasi-innocent example, but what I'm talking about more so is the idea that because our beliefs dictate reality. What we believe as an individual, right, regardless of whether it's true or not, what we believe for ourselves is what dictates reality. Because of the 4 years of Trump and now the 2020 election and all of the stuff moving forward, COVID, we have developed amongst some people in our country a level of distrust in our government that has, whether it's just or unjust, it exists. And because of that, now we have two sides of almost every single conversation, right? Vaxxers, anti-vaxxers, pro-mask, no mask, right? Pro mandates, no mandates. And all of that ties into politics more or less. And it all stems from fear. I think that is what it is. If I could, summarize, I think that the mass psychosis I'm talking about is that there is so much distrust amongst people for our government and for people amongst ourselves, right? An us versus them mentality that has been blown out of proportion. That is what I would say for this particular thing that I'm talking about.
Yeah. And when you say mass psychosis, I go to social media too, right? That we get in these echo chambers of information that only reinforces our existing or pre-existing beliefs. And it just creates more and more hardened silos around us. And, part of it, and I think any way we go with one idea is going to be oversimplifying this, but I look at this as, we talked a little bit about that man box culture and how the way that we're socialized as boys really limits us to three things that we can publicly display in terms of emotion as adults. And it's lust, stress, and anger. And the big one is anger. And so most of our emotions get funneled into that anger lens. And what I see is, I think you're right, it's based on fear, but the fear comes out as anger, irritability, rage.
Yes.
And you were saying that, you kind of drew a comparison between politics and pro sports. And pro sports fascinates me because I think it's one of the few places that men can go and let out their emotions without fear of embarrassment or being mocked. And now I think what we're seeing is this slow crawl of that same dynamic into politics, where politics is now a place where you can allow any emotion to come out, primarily anger. There was a book by Michael Kimmel in 2013 called Angry White Men, where he looked at this phenomenon. And basically what he found is that there was a group of white men who felt that America had broken its promises to them. And the promises were stories that they were told when they were younger. And it was twofold. It was, if you are a good man, if you work hard, you will be able to have a family and your wife will be able to stay at home. Whoop. So there was a book by Michael Kimmel in 2013 called Angry White Men that spoke to this. And basically, there's a group of white men throughout the country who feel hurt and angry because they feel that the promises that America made to them were broken. And the promises were, if I'm a good man, if I work hard, I can buy a house and I can raise a family there, and my wife can stay at home. And many of these men have, because they were, skilled laborers or blue collar workers, were found themselves out of a job, whether they worked in coal mines or factories. And then they started getting into drinking or other drugs. The wife had to go to work in order to support the family. So the wife's angry, the husband's angry. And then they found that by their perception, a lot of the protected groups were jumping in line in front of them for federal handouts. And so all that makes sense. And I think, if we look at the anger, the dynamics of anger as an emotion, when we're really angry, what does it do to us? It makes us feel indignant. It makes us self-righteous. It allows us to externalize all blame. So nothing's my fault. It allows for no introspection. So I don't look at, what's my part in this play? What can I do differently? It allows for no empathy. And then it's empowering, it's energizing. I would argue it's addicting because it's a really nice place to be if everything is someone else's fault. I don't have to take blame or responsibility. I don't have to take accountability. I don't have to look at what's my part in this? What did I do? What am I contributing? And I think people can stay stuck there. And then when we're angry, we think in black or white, all or nothing terms. And so we make the cognitive error of labeling. You're an asshole. You're a Republican.
Yes.
You don't know what you're talking about. And we completely miss the ability to do nuanced thinking, which is what I see us tremendously lacking in all these conversations. We can't look at, well, maybe you're partly right, or maybe you're right about this and I'm right about that, or maybe I need to work on cognitive or emotional empathy and see how can I put myself in their shoes to figure out what they're experiencing. All those things go by the wayside.
Yeah. If I could sum that up into one word, I would say compassion, right? Well, we are lacking in compassion. Because again, when I was talking about like virtues, it's like, well, there's no incentive, right? Compassion is only something that you do because you want to do it. Because it really, other than how you feel and your mindset, right? Which, for you and I, it seems simple because things like gratitude, mindfulness, forgiveness, right? Those things are keys to having a healthy mindset and a healthy life. But you have to, what I've found is that you have to discover that on your own. Like when you've had enough suffering, like when you've had enough bullshit, then you're like, okay, I'm ready to do it this way. Right? I'm ready to forgive people because I'm tired of being angry. Right. Which is what the last two conversations, both professors touched on, was that eventually this thing that we're going through right now, people are going to have enough. People are going to get angered out and they're going to just throw it all up to the wayside. I'm like, you know what? I'm done. I don't care anymore. Like, be angry, do whatever you want. I don't care. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of talking to you. I'm sick of talking to this about this certain thing. I'm sick of what we're doing. Like, I'm over it. And now this is where things will get interesting. I won't go there yet, but so what I see, right, when we're talking about this thing, I think there are two really good examples of how to see people in the public in the United States anyways. and determine what the level of like more or less sanity is, right? And the one place I see it is on the freeway when you're driving. When, if you compare to 10, 20 years ago, you could always argue there's always like crime and people acting like crazies on the freeway. But I think that most people, most people would agree that right now it's worse than it ever has been, at least. And I can speak for that, at least here in Nashville, Tennessee. My wife and I, we've done quite a bit of driving, and it's ludicrous. And why? Mainly because there's not as many cops anymore. There's certainly not any cops on the freeway doing anything, at least where we live. They've got bigger fish to fry, and they got less people to deal with the situations they have going on, and people don't care anymore, right? I said this years ago, is that people are going to realize there's not enough cops to stop everybody from doing what they want to do, and they're just going to do it, which is now what I have experienced when I'm out driving. People don't care. People run red lights. People are cutting each other off, easily going 100 miles an hour on the freeway because they don't care, and there's nobody to stop them from doing it. And then the second place where I see this kind of behavior is on airplanes. Right. And this is, I think everybody can resonate with this because it's been in the news so much frequently, right? People acting just absurd on airplanes because of all kinds of reasons. But, this hysteria that we're experiencing right now, these are symptoms. These are symptoms, or I don't know what the other word might be, but symptoms of that. And we're seeing it. So I think media focuses on the fact that this person, right? And people look at it and like, oh, some Republican guy didn't wear a mask on a plane, so now he's freaking out. It's like, okay, take a step back. Stop looking at it from just this one symmetrical way of seeing it. Do you see that it is happening to all kinds of people, and all kinds of people are in a mentally distressing place, which is what's causing them to act out, right? Like, I would be embarrassed if I tried to pronounce the name of the city, but where that guy ran over those people with his car, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's he's upset, he's angry, right? It's not just Republicans or Democrats or whites or blacks doing things, it's everybody. So take a step back from the political view, change the lens of how you're seeing reality, and look that there are all kinds of people having problems right now. And that is the connection to the mass psychosis I was talking about.
Well, and yeah, I think the way that I look at it is it's emotion.
Yes.
It's not about political, it's not about Democrat or Republican. It's the fact that due to the pandemic, I would say largely, and I think there was factors in effect prior to that, but
Right.
since the pandemic started, depression and anxiety have gone from 10% to 40% of the population, as best we can tell. And I don't
Right.
even think we know. I think I'm going to spend the rest of my professional career disentangling the psychological effects for people from this pandemic. Trauma, people have lost loved ones and haven't had a chance to grieve for them. People are, domestic abuse and violence has skyrocketed. We don't know the full effects of that because you can't even get to a phone to make a report if, your abuser is always there in the apartment with you.
Right.
And so to me, I look at it as we are experiencing not so much a mass psychosis, but almost like a mass psychological breakdown.
Yeah.
That we have never been in a situation like this. Most of us don't possess the tools to know how to deal with it well at all. And even for men, we know that depression in men comes out as irritability.
Right.
And, so I think we've got a big psychological problem. I mean, people talk about the second pandemic being this psychological tsunami of issues. And I think Trump did give permission to be less civil in political discourse.
Yeah.
I think he did give permission to gaslight and lie. I think that's almost become a badge of honor now for many. And that's a strange topic in and of itself, that, you can be accused of sexual assault and then you can wear that like a badge of honor if you're elected official and say, oh yeah, it's just the media trying to take me out.
Right. Yeah. And then that's another, the truth game, right? What is truth, right? well, it's not true because this person said it, right? Or it's not true because this media outlet, right? And listen, and this is part of my problem, and I've talked about this several times, is people get, criticized and conspiracy theories are taboo, but my thing is like, okay, but you can't just outright say conspiracy theories, all of them are wrong, because it's not true. There is legitimate reason to criticize elected officials. Look at the Cuomo brothers, right? Like, not only did you have a governor conducting himself in a not so cool manner, he had his brother who worked for CNN help him trying to cover it up. So it's like, people who give people shit about conspiracy theories, it's like, how can you look at that? Is that not a conspiracy theory, right? Or, like Jeffrey Epstein, everybody hates Alex Jones, but Alex Jones was talking about Jeffrey Epstein in the early 2000s before he even got arrested or indicted for the first charge he got put on. It's not to say Alex Jones is a good dude or that he's doing good things, but what I'm saying is
but he's not all bad.
Exactly, right. I don't subscribe to generalizing people, right? Like, I don't subscribe to saying all cops are bad. I don't believe that. I just don't. I think that there are bad people and there are good people, right? We're all trying
and that's
to
getting back
this.
to that idea of nuanced thinking. And I think, the more that we can stay objective, curious, non-judgmental, so that we can stay calm enough to think about these things rationally. I mean, every man out there wants to say, oh, I'm rational, I'm analytical, I'm not a feeling creature. And it's like, no, bullshit. Like, you are an emotional being first, and then sometimes you're rational.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you don't realize that, we've got a problem, that we are emotional beings. We are emotional animals that think. We are not thinking animals that feel.
Right. And
we are driven by emotion. It's basic approach and avoidance.
Yeah.
We can't live without emotions.
Agreed. As much as we'd like to, we can't.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was my fantasy for a while. I wanted to be Spock.
Exactly.
Or Data.
But even then, like, what do we lose if we become that, right? Like, if you look at like Elon Musk's like Neuralink thing, right? Like, at what point, if we merge ourselves with technology, we lose that emotion, right? Like, what do we risk by losing the emotion?
We lose the ability to prioritize, to plan, to set goals. We lose the ability to be in relationship, because you don't know what to approach and what to avoid. At its most basic level, that's what the emotional system does. It tells us what's safe to approach and what do we need to stay away from.
Like, think about it in these terms, right? Think about the commanders in the United States when the atomic bomb was finished, right? They had to make a choice of sacrificing millions of troops to invade Japan, because they knew that there would be a fight to the death on X Day, is what they called it. Or they use these bombs in a controlled setting, and hopefully break the will of the Japanese to surrender instead of having to sacrifice, right? Like, if you had no emotions, right? If you had no emotions, no abject feeling towards your fellow human, then why stop with two? Why not just carpet bomb the entire country until it's just glass, right? That's what happens when you lack empathy or compassion or have no feeling, right? Spock, if you're only Spock and your whole thought process is, I need to win and I need to destroy my enemy, then that's what happens. And I've seen that in the military, right? I've seen horrible things be done when I was in the military, right? We wanted to provoke the Taliban to come fight us because they were hiding in their holes. So one of the guys on my team suggested, well, let's kill somebody. If we kill somebody that's not doing anything, it'll piss them off and hopefully it'll come out and get to us. So we called in an airstrike on some innocent dude who was minding his own damn business, didn't do anything wrong, and we killed him. And guess what? The Taliban didn't even come out to fight. They didn't come do anything. So where's the compassion there? Where's the emotion and the empathy? And you might argue that it's hard to have that in the battlefield, but that's my point. Like, maybe we shouldn't do that then. Maybe we need to address, feelings and emotions are not bad things. We've had them forever. And as much as we like to think that humans are kind of, dumb, we're not. We're very complex organisms, and our brains are some of the most complex computing systems in the world. It's like, why don't we take more credit into that and try to figure out how to make that better or work with that instead of trying to just get rid of it?
Well, and I think that, it's about learning how to work with the emotions. It's about learning how to manage them. It's about learning how to read them as signposts or messengers. Um, and I think we men are not socialized in that direction, and so most of us are just trying to compartmentalize and hold our emotions at arm's length, which, emotions are too strong. They're going to come back and bite you in the ass at some point.
Right.
You can't hold off anger. You can't hold off grief. You can't hold off depression. You have to look it in the face and go through it. I like the idea that emotions are like a tunnel with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And only until you go through the entire tunnel are you free of that emotion from that particular situation. But oftentimes we don't even want to go in the tunnel because we're so afraid, or we go halfway through the tunnel and we get confused, or we get fearful and we turn around and go back out the way we came in. And so then we become stuck in that emotion.
So, okay. So moving from that, the fear, the anger, the confusion, where, from a psychology standpoint, where do you see us heading in the next couple of years? And before you answer, I want to preface this. The last two people I talked to have both had very different ideas of this. One was a very optimistic. He was Dr. Joe Meyer was saying that he thinks that we're heading into a new romantic era, a new era of romanticism, where because this is going to come to a head where people are just going to say, fuck it, I'm done with politics, I'm done with business. I want to have a cultural revolution and have music and poetry and God and all of these things. And then the Professor Robert Talese, he says he's a little less optimistic. He thinks that the next 5 to 10 years, maybe more, are going to be more of this political kind of chaos. What do you think?
Well, that's a tough question. I'm not much for prognostication, but I think we're going to continue to see a split for a while. I think that we're going to continue to see anger for a while. I would love it if people just got tired of the anger. I do think that after, I don't know how long, a few more years, people are going to simmer down. And I could also see a rebirth of like the 1960s, where people are, because we see this in psychology now, even people getting more into psychedelics as a way to heal.
Right.
And I could see, and I see that in the younger generation, that they're more accepting of the LGBTQ plus community. I see them as more accepting of different values and different races in general. And yet I still see a lot of rigid thinking. And I think one of the things that we are fighting against is this rigid thinking that's fueled by anger. And so I think to the extent that we can step back and look at our own anger as individuals, whether that's irritation, frustration, annoyance, or rage, the better off we're going to be, because we really need to get into more complex forms of thinking, more nuanced thinking, to be able to see, like, as you said with Alex Jones, the fact that he's not all bad. Even the fact that the Cuomo brothers are not all bad.
Right.
I think that we get ourselves into trouble when we put labels on people and think of them as all one thing. Because in my experience, no one is all good or all bad. We're some mixture of the two.
Right.
And the mixture varies. But I think what we're trying to do is start conversations with people that don't think the same as we do, with a curious attitude, so that we can find out where they're coming from, in an attempt to create more connection, more bridges between us. Because I think fundamentally we have lost the connection to one another's humanity in this most recent era.
Yeah. I like to think of it as, I just got done in my last history class, we talked about the Great Awakening, and then the Second Great Awakening of like the early America, or Enlightenment period in Europe, and it was really more about religion in a way, but it was also a time of new ideas, a time of
Mm-hmm.
freedom, a time of people experimenting and trying to understand, what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean if we say that all men are created equal? Why do we still have slaves? Why haven't we let the slaves go yet? What about women? Like, if we're saying all of this, why aren't women created the same way? Or why don't we treat them the same way? I think I see us heading in that direction into a quote, a quasi third great awakening, which is more of like becoming independent thinkers again, and in the Stoics, and Robert Tallis said something that is unanimously conjoined, which is that democracy needs people from both sides of the table to be able to communicate, but democracy also needs that its citizens be educated and and what's the word, active in the society that they live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that for a long time we've lived, being in America anyways, I think that we've just allowed the political sphere to just do its thing. We've just trusted them to go like, all right, cool. And it's never been a thing until recently when Trump was president. I think more people are involved in politics and reading about it and learning about it than ever before, because they're like, how could this have happened where we have this guy and all of this stuff that's going on? How did this happen? And it's because we, as citizens of our own country, were asleep at the wheel, and we didn't care enough to pay attention to what's going on to it. And we fail to realize that in this country, democracy is built for the citizens. It is not for our government to rule over us, as in, parliament and kings and queens. It's not about that. This is about us. They need to work for us. They need to hear what we are saying and be a reflection of who we are and what we want for this country, not just whatever the new trend is or whatever woke or anti-woke ideology comes to their mind. It's not about that. The citizens don't want that. The citizens want a country that everybody is treated equal and fairly, and that there's equal opportunity, right? Like, that was the whole foundation, the whole idea of what America was supposed to be. I think
Mm-hmm.
we have drifted a course, and maybe what this is us finding our way back, because citizens in the country are wanting to be more involved.
Yeah, I think that that's a great interpretation, that this is simply a course adjustment, that it was a wake-up call.
Definitely. Definitely.
And hopefully that's true.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. But I also recognize that it probably will take more time. It'll take more time. I think that people tend to not want to pay attention to something until it's directly impacting them. So until things get out of hand so much that it is impacting everyone's every single day life, there won't be more cause for change. But again, it is happening. It's just, slowly but surely the wheels are turning. So, John, the last thing I want to talk about is like, what can people do right now, right? If people are struggling, if people are kind of like unsure of where they are in this world right now, what are some things people can do to kind of just stabilize their life, stabilize their area of life?
I think I've always been a fan of kind of watering your own lawn first. I think real growth begins with you looking at yourself, at us looking at ourselves first and foremost. For that very reason that I mentioned earlier, that I think we humans suck at self-awareness. If you ask a group of 100 people, are you self-aware? 90 something percent of them will say, of course, yes, I'm totally self-aware. In truth, what we find out from research by Tasha Eurich is it's only about 15% that are actually self-aware. And so we have a lot of blind spots. And I think that, again, looking at oneself, going inward, which is on some levels a terrifying journey, but the only journey left is to figure out what makes you tick. What are your values? What does integrity mean to you? What does it mean to be a human? What does happiness mean to you? What's important to you? And emotional management, like, let's learn some emotional management skills. Let's learn some self-soothing skills. Let's learn how to relax. Let's learn how to accept all of our emotions as signposts or messengers, so that we can get the message of what is it they're trying to tell us, so that when we have a political discussion with someone who has different views than ours, we don't fly into a rage. I remember a time when I didn't necessarily agree with Republicans on the issues, but I could respect them for their values. I could respect them because I knew that they were trying to do what they thought was best for this country, and we could have rational conversations. I don't see that in this day and age. I see it as discourse has been overtaken by emotion, and the emotion has often or frequently made those sorts of valuable conversations impossible. And so I think to return to a place that is non-judgmental, that is curious, that is objective, is a really, really good way to proceed. I'm just curious. So what do you value? What do you base that on? Where are you coming from? I like John Haidt's framework of the 5 values that he brought into politics later, which is, 1 is care, 2 is fairness, 3 is loyalty, 4 is authority, 5 is sanctity. And what he's found is that liberals are very firm and care a lot about the first 2, care and fairness. The conservatives are equally concerned about all 5 of these. So, okay, let's use that as a jumping off point to figure out what's most important. What are you prioritizing here? You say sanctity or purity is important. Okay, why is that? What's that based on? And it may be based on no more than a feeling, but okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, in Robert Talisa's book, Overdoing Democracy, he makes a great point about there should be an institutionalized, either day or week or something where politicians, in Congress and the Senate, they should have time, like in the Greek philosophers' times, where there is civil debate, right? Okay, we don't agree on this thing. So and I want to caveat to what you just said there. It's like, all right, we got these 5 things. We agree on these 5 things. Where can we meet, right? It's compromise. Simple, very non-complex word, compromise. But what happens is that we are in a point right now where both sides are accusing each other of conspiratorial things, right? Like, you're a pedophile, you're being run by pedophiles. You're a bunch of communist, socialists, whatever's. And it's like, dude, that's just childlike. We have reduced our language to childlike mentality. And these elected officials, these people that are supposed to be running our country, are no more than, schoolyard bullies, just calling each other names. They need, and it can't just be, okay, Congress, okay, Senate, we're meeting up today. Today is to debate on ideas and policies, or a week, whatever. Can't just be that, because we're not in a place where they can be trusted to just talk about it without calling each other names. There needs to be a moderator, much like in the debates for the presidential candidates, right? There needs to be somebody to sit there and be like, all right, hey, listen up. You're being a dick. Calm down. Stop calling each other names. What is the way forward on this agreement? There's nobody keeping those people in check, in my opinion. That's part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, and I think the anger and the name calling and the vitriol all undermines trust.
Yes.
And if we can't agree on what a basic fact is, if we can't be civil to one another, if we don't have a relationship to draw upon, what do we base the trust upon? Right. And so then it becomes, in Senate and Congress, where it's a win if I can just keep the opposing party from doing anything. And that's not the way our democracy was intended to run.
No. And what's happening right now, and you could probably argue it's been going on forever, but that would even further my point, which is that what happens is that it's about who's in power right now, right? Okay, well, when Trump was president, it was the Republicans. Okay, now it's the Democrats, right? So, but what's happening to the other side? There isn't a good sportsmanship conduct happening, right? It's like, okay, the Democrats won. We don't agree. But where there are things we can't agree, let's help support them. Like, they've got the majority. They're going to win anyways. So, we'll try to do what we can for our beliefs, and we'll keep, sticking up for what we believe. But if they've got something good, we need to acknowledge that it's good. That's not happening, right? When Democrats are in power, the Republicans are trying to stonewall their legislation and trying to deflate anything that they try, just like the Democrats did to Trump when he was in office. That is not helpful, right? And again, you could probably say that it's been going on even, far beyond what I'm talking about. But even if that's the case, that's again proving my point. That is not helpful. it is
But
okay to
it's,
have opposing ideas. Go
I mean,
ahead.
it's interesting because it does bring up this idea of Congress, Senate, the relationship with the presidency in parallel or as a metaphor to a good or bad relationship. Because, you know, in a bad relationship, you've got the four horsemen of the apocalypse per John Gottman, which is criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and defensiveness.
Mm,
And those four are the harbingers of divorce and breakup. And that's exactly what we've got going on in our politics. We've got all those things fueled by anger, fueled by mistrust.
definitely.
And, you know, we've got to find a way, because I think I do agree with you. It's kind of like all of our senators, congressmen, politicians are at times, or many of them are behaving like 5-year-olds, which is the most emotional part of ourselves, which is just screaming and nonsense and
Yeah.
anger and vitriol. And it's like, guys, we got to grow up. And, you know, we have to behave like adults who have some emotional management skills.
Yes. And then the other part of that too is like, you know, we've touched a lot on the name calling stuff, but here's another thing that I wish I would have brought up earlier is that people saying stuff that isn't necessarily true. They're just saying it to say it, right? Which is kind of like a narcissistic tendency, right?
Narcissistic tendency. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that, but we're seeing that, right? Because you know, and I don't want to get into like a heated conversation about it, but just take on vaccines or not, or no vaccines, right? Or pro mandate or no mandate, you know, mask or no mask. How is it that we have so many scientists and doctors, but yet we can't agree? We can't all agree on these things, right? And I don't know that. Of course, there's always going to be opposing ideas, but what I see happening is that, and that's why that book I was just reading, Overdoing Democracy, is so brings up this point, is that we cling to ideas based on what we identify with, right? So like so because I identify as Republican, I'm gonna say no masks, no mandates, no vaccines, and you know, blah blah blah, right? Or the opposite, you know, whatever it is. That doesn't mean that it is true, and that doesn't mean that your ideas are the best or that they are actually based in science, right? I find that people all the time, and on both sides of the conversation, people who strongly advocate for a vaccine or for mandates or whatever, I'm like, okay, cool. What are you basing that on? Well, I read this. No, not an article from CNN. Those people are not doctors. Where's your facts? Where's your peer-reviewed study that you read? Where's what medical journal did you get that from? Well, I don't read those things. Oh, well, maybe you should, because you know, whatever it is, Fox News, CNN, it's the same thing. They're not doctors, they're
Well,
not
yeah,
scientists.
they're all biased. And I mean, the funny thing is that if you were to approach someone with a different view than yours with concrete, airtight
Mm,
facts, the psychological dynamic there is it just reinforces that person's belief that they had in the beginning and hardens their belief.
yes.
And so, you know, we got to go about it in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you brought that point up too, because I said this I can't remember when, but I said that there's people with the knowledge and then there's people without, but it doesn't matter who's got the knowledge or who doesn't, because you might as well be talking to a stone wall, right? It's like speaking
Mm-hmm.
another language. That's why the whole vaccine thing, I feel like has just been so misrepresented. They're just not talking. They're reaching their base, but they're not reaching people who can just sit down and be like, hey, look, I understand that you're concerned. Okay. What are your questions? Let me do my best to answer them. Right. Like somebody, I forget who said this, but they had a really great way of putting this. And I was just magnifique. He said, you know, we don't get people to lose weight who are unhealthy by fat shaming them. We get them to lose weight by educating them, by saying, hey, this is what a healthy diet looks like. This is what exercise does, right? It's not cool to fat shame people. So it shouldn't be cool to shame people who don't want to get a vaccine. Educate them. Try to find a way to talk to them. But it brings me to the point that you just brought up, right? By trying to throw facts and science in someone's face and say, this is this, that's just posturing yourself and moving them further away from what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I think communication, right? Compassion.
Yeah. Curiosity,
Yes.
asking questions rather than making statements, being curious about where the other party's coming from.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so, hey, Cam, I got to wrap up because I actually think I do have COVID. And so I'm kind of
Understood.
fading.
No, I got you, man.
Because my fiance had it, and I think I got it from her. So
John, if people want to find you or listen to your podcast, the Evolved Caveman podcast, where can they find you? Where can they look you up? Where are you found these days?
I'm at theevolvedcaveman.com or guidetoself.com, or you can find my podcast on any of the major platforms for podcasts.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate your insight. It was really great to have somebody who is so well spoken as you to kind of touch on these points. And I really, what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to help bring these touchy conversations to people in a way that they can see that there is a way to have discourse and not be angry with each other and be able to talk to each other like people again.
Absolutely. I appreciate the work you're doing, Cam.
Thanks, man. All right, everybody. That's it for this week. We'll catch you next week. Thanks for being here. It's been Hermit Radio.